If you're an American conservative, you know that the societal values we hold sacred are under attack. They are hanging in the balance. How can you protect those values? By staying informed. The Closing Argument will deliver news and supporting evidence you need to support and defend those values. Here's Paul Smith.
Good morning. This is Paul Smith, your host of The Closing Argument. In these podcasts, we discuss some of the important but controversial moral, political, and legal issues that affect us and our families. Some of the things that we discuss are not politically correct, but they need to be discussed because they are true and they can help us to solve some of these serious problems that are facing the nation. Today, we're going to talk about the status of the climate change hoax in America. Now, this is being recorded on July 21, 2022. So I want to give you a little bit of background. Yesterday, July 20th, President Joe Biden went to Massachusetts in a field there next to a river in Massachusetts, and he announced that the climate change situation has gotten so bad that we are in what he called code red. The entire human planet is in danger of serious problems if we do not immediately act. He said that he was disappointed that Congress had not acted and that therefore he was shortly going to issue some executive orders that it will begin to address this. The next day, he apparently contracted COVID and has been tied up. The timing of this is, I'll tell you one thing about the timing. His poll numbers have never been worse. I think some of the best polls in his favor show that he has 30% support around the nation. He just returned from a trip that was not good for him when he went to the Saudi Arabian peninsula asking the Saudis for additional oil to help in our shortage that he has imposed upon us by not letting us produce oil, but he wants to get this dirtier oil from Saudi Arabia so he can help us in our energy crunch. He was ridiculed for this, and I think he's trying to go on the offense to try to, kind of get control of what's being discussed. Well, there's some other things of what's going on right now, and he didn't mention them, but I'm going to mention them so you understand what's happening. This comes less than a month after the United States Supreme Court issued its ruling in West Virginia versus the EPA, at which time the Supreme Court said that the administration cannot use Section 111 of the Clean Air Act to shut down coal power plants. Both the Biden administration and before it, the Obama administration had sought to do this, and it was eventually struck down by the court. The court said, well, that section allows you some regulation where you can make the power plants use the best available technology to reduce undesirable emissions, but it doesn't give you the authority to actually put them out of business. This actually is very important. Biden, I presume, would be very happy if he put all the power plants out of existence, even though 80% of the energy we get in the United States for our various needs comes from fossil fuels. They don't seem to have thought this through. And the economic situation that we're in right now, which is very difficult with inflation going through the roof, worse than it's been in over 40 years, and a lot of struggling people, he could care less about it. In fact, the theme of his administration is, well, we know it's going to hurt, but hey, it's feel the pain. The pain is good because you're helping to address the crisis. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, his transportation secretary, basically said this pain is good. We need to go electric, even though that's not feasible or possible right now. Also, internationally, Holland has experienced serious economic and agricultural products as they have self-imposed refusal to use fertilizers in their crops because somebody said this might hurt the environment. The next thing you know, now they're begging other people for food because they're having a hard time producing the crops they need. Sri Lanka, I believe, was the country that also recently had serious problems because of their climate change problems. And frankly, what's happening around the globe, while Europe was at the forefront of embracing these green policies, they are now regretting it, many of them, recognizing they have hurt them economically. And frankly, they don't help the climate one bit. Now, I would encourage you at this point to get my book at my website, cpaulsmith.com, The Climate Change Hoax Argument. The argument set forth there concisely in a book that's about 100 pages will help you. One of the things you will notice if you're following this issue is that in the media, there is no discussion of the science. The only discussion is for people who says, well, the scientists all agree. But that's not true. And Biden repeated that the other day. He continues to repeat that all the scientists say that this will happen. And you'll hear people on TV say that, but they never get into the science itself. And so I want to take a few minutes and review this for a minute. So is there global warming? Yes, there is. A very little. Perhaps 1 degree centigrade over the last 130 or 40 years. This amount continues an increase, but it's not out of the realm of what is normal and acceptable. And would this increase cause problems? Not really. And is it causing the oceans to rise? No. The oceans have been rising for 200 or 300 years or more, maybe as many as 10,000 years. But the rise is very small. And in fact, some scientists say the rising has decreased in rate in the last few years. And so, I don't know, 20 years ago, the green activists kind of shifted away from the global warming being the bad guy to increases in CO2. And they did that because temperatures were basically flat globally from 2000 to 2010. There wasn't global warming. And even though what had been happening was very minor, it basically didn't warm. Now it's increased a little bit, but not at an alarming rate. Is there a discussion of this? No, there isn't. What about CO2, which has now become the bad guy? The height of that false narrative was with the Supreme Court ruling in EPA versus Massachusetts when that court agreed that the EPA had to regulate CO2 and that it was a pollutant. And as we've discussed before, that's kind of a strange ruling since CO2 is necessary for plants to survive, just as oxygen is necessary for humans, for animals to survive. But scientists have disputed at least, and some of them refute the notion that increases in CO2 today are causing problems. Frankly, they point out that the increases in CO2 are increasing plant yield, are therefore good. And they dispute that the human emissions from burning fossil fuels is even a significant factor in the increasing CO2 in our atmosphere. The CO2 levels have increased. They are not tied directly to increases in warming. That has been shown. But the increases cannot be said to be causing destruction. It is said, and Biden said this, and the dissent said this in the recent Supreme Court case of West Virginia versus EPA. They said, well, that it's undisputed that we have warming and that this warming is causing the rise in temperatures. It is, and let me mention what the dissent said that it's causing. It is causing increases in heat-related deaths, coastal inundation, erosion, more frequent and intense hurricanes, floods, and other extreme weather events, drought, destruction of ecosystems, and potentially significant disruption of food production. That's what the dissent said. And they criticized the court for not allowing the EPA to shut down the coal-fired power plants. Let me take a second and go through each of these contentions. The dissent was written by Justice Kagan, and she cites these with great positiveness and confidence. Of course, the source for some of that is from the IPCC that we have debunked in the past as being a totally unreliable UN agency whose sole purpose is to prove that climate is changing and is leading to destruction. They are not reliable, but she cites them as her source. Now, let's go through this list one at a time here. Has there been warming in our climate in the planet? Yes, there has, but it's very insignificant. Is there increased health-related deaths? Actually, I don't know the answer to that. It is very possible. But I think there are probably more deaths caused by cold temperatures than heat. Anyway, I haven't read anything that supports that. Has there been coastal inundation? No. The rising of the oceans has been minimal. And the predicted rise of 20 feet in a few years is just ridiculous, and there's no evidence that will happen. The coastal inundation is a joke. Has there been erosion? Oh, my goodness. I haven't heard of it, evidence of this, and I just find that ridiculous. Erosion, of course, is related to the rain we get and whether there's drought and how the vegetation is doing. I have serious doubts that there's evidence to support that, because actually increased CO2 levels causes increased plant production, and therefore this would counter any increase in erosion. How about more frequent and intense hurricanes, floods, and other extreme weather events? This has been debunked. Several scientists not only refute it, they say just the opposite has happened. And again, I would refer to my book, The Climate Change Hoax Argument. I've got sources for these. Have there been more droughts? That's in with these other events. I don't think that can be linked to the warming and increases of CO2. How about destruction of ecosystems? Same with erosion. I haven't heard studies that support this. And then finally, potentially significant disruption of food production. I mean, that's carefully worded. Potentially significant disruption. In other words, it hasn't happened, but could. That's ridiculous. There has been increased production of plants because of increased CO2 levels. In Justice Kagan's dissent, she pointed out that the Trump administration cautioned that the measures that were being asked here would have an exorbitant cost, because it would almost certainly force the closure of coal-fired plants. And that's exactly right. And thank goodness the Supreme Court recognized that. But that is no little thing. How are you going to run your electric cars who get their electricity from the electricity that is generated from the coal-firing plants? Has Buttigieg thought this through? Has the administration thought this through? Actually, no, they haven't, because they want to shut down the fossil fuel industry, which is 80% of the fuel that runs America, without having an alternative in place. So Justice Kagan ends her dissent by pointing out that the court, she says, does not have a clue about how to address climate change. Well, that's one true statement in her dissent. She certainly does not have a clue, and neither do the Green New Deal people, neither does President Biden. Thank goodness the Supreme Court took a stance here. Now, I was hoping in the case of West Virginia versus EPA, that the Supreme Court might have overruled the former Massachusetts versus EPA case, where they said that CO2 was a pollutant. The court did not do that. It did limit another case